I'm thinking about language today, not quite sure why, but about etymology particularly. Because I do find the origins of words and phrases really fascinating sometimes, particularly when they have very elaborate kind of metaphorical content. I was thinking recently about that word inauguration, for example. Inauguration of a president or the inauguration of a certain public figure. And how the origins of inauguration lie in augur, which itself lies in, see if I get this right, making prognostications about the future based on patterns of birds in flight, I think. It's something like that. So an inauguration has very odd origins. I'm not really going to talk about inauguration right now, but I guess I'm just interested in the role of those etymological origins and the kind of metaphors that they bring up in relation to how we understand a concept and how we understand the word relating to that concept, I suppose. And I'm prompted to think about this actually by some of Steven Pinker's writing again. I'm rereading Stuff of Thought. I do love Steven Pinker's writing, it's really lucid. But yeah, in the Stuff of Thought he's talking about metaphors and what he calls the metaphor. Talks about it in a way which is slightly acerbic towards George Lakoff actually, which is quite interesting. But he's talking about metaphor, and how sometimes if you look at the etymology of the language that we use, it clearly is metaphorical, but it's so buried in the depths of our history and so forgotten in a sense that we can't possibly be using those metaphors to understand the term. And the example he gives is this expression when something is coming to a head. We all know, I guess most of us know what it means when something comes to a head. It's when some process, some project that we're involved in, some event is reaching its culmination point, at which some disastrous or marvellous change will take place. The end point is coming, if you like. And he's talking about this phrase, coming to a head, which we unproblematically seem to understand. And he points out that the etymology of that word and the origins of that phrase come from kind of medicine, I guess. They come from pustules and spots and pimples and blemishes on the face that fill up with pus at a certain point they fill up with pus to such an extent the pressure is so great that they burst, which is a really graphic and unpleasant image. But I think he quite rightly points out that when we use the phrase coming to a head, that's not what we're thinking about. That's not the image that's going through our mind when we say that this particular thing is coming to a head. Now the logic of conceptual metaphor theory, which says that understanding is based on metaphors, would perhaps say that even though we're not consciously thinking of things coming to a head, of pustules filling with pus and then exploding, most metaphors are processed non-consciously, and there seems to be quite a lot of evidence to support that, which means that in somewhere deep in our non-conscious imagination there are pustules filling up with goo which are about to burst when we use that phrase or when we entertain that concept. But again, Pinker rightly says that's very unlikely because most people aren't aware of that's the etymological origin or the cultural origins of the phrase, and it would be impossible not only for us to consciously think about that as a metaphor, but to non-consciously entertain it either. It's not part of our cognitive repertoire. So what I think Pinker's doing there is he's suggesting that if that's not the metaphor, then other kinds of processes may be going on which don't use metaphor at all. And he's kind of harking back to I suppose, a suggestion of some kind of symbolic interaction which doesn't use metaphor, in which these phrases and concepts are almost disembodied symbols. But I'm not sure that necessarily is the case, because certainly in that phrase coming to a head, certainly I wasn't even aware of that origin, But when I think of that phrase, and when I think what I'm thinking about when I think of that phrase, if that makes any sense, I certainly don't see pustules, but I do see something. I do imagine something going on. I can kind of feel the kind of movement in my body, of movement forward, perhaps, of an arriving. This idea of coming somewhere is about arriving, and coming to a head is a kind of terminal point, perhaps a quite a high terminal point, in the way that we use, the head of a company is the terminal point in the upward slope of promotion, or the head of a glass of beer is the frothy bit at the that's at the very top. The head of any organisation is the top bit. So I'm kind of imagining coming to a head as being movement towards in a kind of upward ascendant gradient towards an end point. That's what coming to a head means, which is deeply metaphorical. It's metaphorical in a set of different ways. It's partly a metaphor of the one I've just described, movement to an end point, but that itself is stacked on top of the idea that ascendant endpoints and journeys are partly embodied, so we understand the end of something, the upward end of something, as the head of something. And even though pustules and spots don't feature in my understanding, lots of other things do. So it doesn't discount the possibility of being metaphorical, it just discounts that particular metaphor.